Okay, well, I guess I will go ahead and get started for today. So thank you everybody for joining here. It's going to be the first of 5 sessions that we're going to be working through over the next few weeks. Today we will be covering blueprints of the best, which is really just going to be kind of a high level overview of like general game strategy and then kind of working through year by year and actually looking at what traits some of the world powerhouses really honed in on to kind of separate themselves from uh, the middle of the pack, but also what some lower resource teams were able to do to
I'm hoping it's not just me, but I did lose Ryan's audio.
Yeah, same.
Okay.
can you hear me? Yeah, okay, cool. All right. Not sure what that was about, but yep. So we're looking at year by year, what teams did to kind of separate themselves and kind of where their focus was. Before we really get into all of that, though, wanted to first talk about what the next few weeks will look like. The next 2 weeks are going to be like after this week, the next 2 weeks will be kind of more Google Sheets focused and looking at how we collect and clean data, a little bit of like actual scouting, uh, like information there as well, and then also how we're analyzing that, and then kind of getting into more specifics of individual match strategy after that, and then alliance selection itself will be our last one. And kind of as I said, I think in like the chief post and the random Discord posts I made, originally these were going to be tailored to, like the younger members of our team on 422. Um, I've kind of, worked in a little more information than I would typically give just a new member, since I do figure that, a lot of the people joining today probably have a little more experience than most of the new members. So some of this will probably be a little bit familiar to a lot of you. But I think we'll have plenty of good stuff to talk about. Also, we're just going to keep this, fairly casual overall. So if you have any questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat. If you want to come off mute, I'll be happy to answer that. We'll have some time at the end of this to kind of go over Q&A, whether it's specific to the presentation, we'll have a little bit of time for that, but also just like general Q&A if you want to ask, whatever questions you have. Um, feel free to stick around and do that, since I know people might not want to be waiting for the proper workshop to actually ask whatever questions they have. So with that, I guess I will get into the next part, which is an introduction of myself very quickly. So I was a 422 student in 2016 was my first season as an actual student. Graduated in 2019 and came back to Mentor pretty much immediately. I've always been, very scouting and strategy focused. Not a ton of technical knowledge that actually my two older brothers are the two engineers of the family. Both of them are on 1086 back in 2010 through my middle brother graduated in 2016. He was actually the driver and they won the world championship that year. So he will always brag about that and he always has that on me. But um, as a scouting lead and mentor, 422 has found our own, different levels of success with, a couple of district championships, few division finalists, and this season was probably, well, definitely our best season to date. So still obviously doing a lot of learning, but over the years have picked up, uh, you know, on a few different things about scouting and strategy for sure. So about myself though, graduated from Virginia Tech a couple years ago in 2022. Did spend a year mentoring Copperhead out in the Montgomery County area. Um, and now I'm actually a data analyst at a large medical supply distributor. So we can just jump into the meat of the presentation here. So again, we're going to start pretty broad, right? So all games really are going to have at their core a similar structure. You're going to have some sort of main cycle, all right? And you hear that term thrown around a lot. What that means is the cycle of starting in one spot, going driving to whatever intaking area, picking up a game piece, moving it somewhere else, and then, you know, dropping it, shooting it, however you're scoring in that particular game. All right. And, sometimes it's one game piece, sometimes it's two. Um, there's going to be little tweaks on every single game, but every game recently has had kind of this as the main objective. Just pick something up, move it. And generally, the more they're, it's typically like the higher up you score, the more points you get. The more difficult it is to score, you're typically going to get more points. Pretty basic stuff there. And generally, there's going to be some kind of rank point for that. And you're also going to have an end game. Every recent game since 2015 has had some sort of end game, whether it's a climb or driving up onto a ramp. Um, it's typically going to be worth only like a fraction of the points that are available through completing the main objective. And it also typically will offer a rank point. Most games will also have an autonomous, of course, with the exception of 2019. We'll get to that, where it's pretty much just shortened cycles with a little bit of bonus on it. And some years it gives RP. I figure if they're going to stick with the 6 RP thing, they'll kind of, stick with 1 RP for your main cycle, 1 for end game, 1 for auto. So with that, kind of just sticking with some basics here. Um, a majority of games and a majority of matches within those games are just going to come down to who can do more cycles and breaking that down into parts. There's driving actually, from point A to point B, intaking, just actually picking up the game piece, indexing, which isn't super relevant to every game, but basically what I'm talking about with that is, the process of moving a game piece from your intake or from, your hopper, your bin of game pieces, to your scoring mechanism. It's particularly relevant in games where you have multiple game pieces, typically multiple balls that you're allowed to hold at once. Sometimes part of the challenge is actually getting all of those to your manipulator at a fast rate. Alignment, kind of wanted to just separate that out from driving. Just the actually getting squared up with your scoring location, and then scoring, which is the process of lifting up your elevator or actually shooting out your ball, and the amount of time that that takes, and kind of all of that is the time it takes for all of that. You multiply that by reliability to kind of get your expected cycle time, right? Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to optimize in any single game is the amount of time it takes for you to complete a given cycle, right? And so your reliability is basically, the percentage of cycles that you're going to be able to hit at, your optimal speed. That can be because, if you lose communications, if your intake breaks or something like that, that's all downtime that, in an optimal cycle, you shouldn't have to worry about, but would kind of affect that average cycle time. And breaking it down a little bit further, and you'll kind of get why I'm breaking it down this much, but um, you can break it down driving into like straight line speed slash acceleration, as well as maneuverability, which, nowadays with swerve, most robots are going to be, highly maneuverable. Traversability, relevant in some games where there's obstacles or cable bumps or anything that your robot might need to cross over. Um, that's something that could potentially slow you down. Some drivetrains are going to handle that better than others. And then for intaking, there's the actual capability of your intake. Almost every single game, you're going to have the option of a ground pickup versus picking up directly from some sort of station. You might have an intake with multiple intakes on each side of your robot, um, and all of that can affect that average cycle time depending on what the actual situation is that you're in. The speed with that which you can actually pick it up. And then I'm also singling out here touch it, own it, which if you've been around, probably something that you've heard before, but basically just talking about, once you come in contact with the game piece, do you have full control over it? And because essentially you don't want to be, dropping game pieces and having to go back and pick them up. All of that kind of ties into reliability as well. Um, Indexing, you can kind of break down into, your speed, your fire rate, as well as some games you have to kind of sort through game pieces, really only relevant in 2022. Alignment, um, not really too much else to break down there. That's kind of already its own thing. And then for scoring, I said range, which kind of talking about obviously for like a shooting game, how far out can you actually shoot from, but also in like a pick and place game, how long is your reach? How close do you actually have to be before you can place that down, as well as speed there. And then for reliability, accuracy, when you're scoring, how often do you miss? And functionality is kind of the thing that I mentioned before. So those are kind of the basics that are, every single game is going to have those features, right? And there's different ways that you can, improve these factors. Like for driving, as I talked about, most teams now swerve. Depends on the game, though. If there's a lot of obstacles and you need, larger wheels, whatever, uh, you know, maybe tank is the play. Having a low center of gravity, lets you accelerate faster and without having to worry about tipping or um, losing any sort of control there. You can do things like if there's cable bumps, just adding the wheel wedges, um, simple things like that. For intaking, a lot of things you'll see like two-sided over the bumper intakes. Um, a large majority of games and game pieces, roller intakes are the way to go. Just for example, like the Cheesy Poos have done roller intakes, I think like every single year since like mid 2000s. So it just every game piece ever basically has lent itself to uh, you know, not using a claw of any sort. Indexing, you can do things like spindexers for alignment. You have things like, turrets, um, lateral elevators, pass-through scoring, which basically just means you're intaking on one side of the robot and scoring on the other, which means you don't have to turn. And for scoring, you can do, increase your range with like a variable shooter hood, which basically just changes the angle with which you're shooting, or for pick and place games, looking at elevators versus arms. So kind of with the basics out of the way, before we kind of get into the year by year breakdown, um, wanted to talk about how your team should be, you know, setting your goals and aligning your strategy to that, right? Because you're going to need, as the season goes on, if you want to be competitive at those later events, the further in the season you get, the more mechanical complexity is required typically. But a majority of teams really with the resources that you're given should be focusing on competing early, trying to win your week 1 and 2 events. And to do that, just focus on whatever the main cycle of that game is, right? Like unless you're in, a district where, you have like just real powerhouse teams, um, you're almost always going to be able to win by just focusing purely on the main game element, getting your robot done early, getting your software tuned, getting driving practice, and actually just having a reliable machine rather than trying to do too much and you know ending up not getting your robot done until the week of competition. It's a trap that so many teams fall for every single year. And it obviously is easier said than done, but we'll see some great examples as we're working through this of teams who were able to keep it simple and find a lot of success. For like specialists, and what I'm calling there is like teams who can focus on only kind of the secondary cycle. Um, it is viable, but at the lowest levels where you're really reliant on having a team who can kind of do the main task, uh, you're going to struggle a little bit almost every single year. Typically, these kind of teams are better at DCMP and Worlds, but really you need to play. If you're not playing the main cycle, you need to play everything else, every other aspect of the game well. And the last thing I wanted to call out here is that you really need to lean into what your team is best at, um, both in the design, before the season as you're building your robot, but also like in competitions as you're, making up your strategies, making sure that you kind of, stay true to what your original plan was, what you have focused all your effort on being good at. Alrighty, so let's just jump into our year by year analysis. So we're going to start, with this year's game, which I'm not going to do the game reveal for this one. So hopefully everyone in here, especially my 422 kids, are all aware of what the rules are. And then we're going to kind of work our way back into the past further and further.
Welcome to the 2025 First Robotics Competition game, Reefscape, presented by Haas. 2 alliances of 3 teams each compete to earn points by harvesting algae, seeding coral on their reef, and returning to their barge to ascend to the ocean's surface. Alliances earn additional rewards for meeting specific scoring thresholds and for cooperating with their opponents. Prior to the start of the match, teams can choose to hang a shallow cage or a deep cage on their barge. Robots start each match at their starting line and may be preloaded with 1 coral. During the first 15 seconds of the match, robots are autonomous and can be programmed to leave the starting line, remove algae from their reef, and place coral on their reef. If all enabled robots on an alliance leave the starting line and score at least one coral in auto, the alliance earns the auto ranking point. During the following 2 minutes and 15 seconds of the match, drivers control their robot. Robots can place algae in their net and collect coral from human players at their coral station to place on their reef. Coral placed higher on the reef are worth more points. If an alliance can score enough coral on all 4 levels, they will earn an additional ranking point. Robots can also deliver algae to their processor. Once processed, the algae can be taken by the opposing human player and scored into the net. When 2 algae are delivered to each processor, both alliances earn a co-op point. The co-op point reduces the number of coral needed on the reef to earn the ranking point and influences a team's rank in the tournament. As time runs out, robots race back to their barge to hang on their cage and ascend to the ocean surface. Points are awarded to robots that can hang on a shallow cage, and even more points are awarded to robots that can hang on a deep cage. An alliance that scores enough barge points will earn the barge ranking point. The alliance that earns the most points overall wins the match.
So this year's game kind of had a pretty set progression in, what strategy looked like as the year went on. So early season, you know, your choral cycles were what were deciding almost every single match. Um, in fact, our team did not have a single match at our first event. Went back and checked. Not have a single match at our first event that was decided by either endgame or algae. Right, every single match, the difference was purely, coral. And that held true for probably, at least through the first 2 weeks. I know in obviously in some, as I said, some higher level districts where you have some of those powerhouses, those teams in particular are going to be, doing all of the tasks. But for a majority of matches, that was not the deciding factor. As you got into kind of the late season, that's when, we kind of saw how algae and climbs started to really matter there, right? You started seeing, alliances with triple climbs that were able to kind of, quickly close gaps on alliances that didn't have them. You're able to see teams who were doing like 10 algae in the net, um, kind of passing teams who were solid on the reef. And we saw kind of a mix of, 2 offense plus 1 defense, as well as some triple O. And that kind of really shifted to all triple O by the time of Worlds, right? And the reason for that was your third bots in Elam's Worlds were still really good coral scorers, and almost none of them were really good enough to cut the number of cycles that they would have added, right? So your actual math, the calculus of whether or not you should play defense didn't really add up anymore. You saw that like deep climbs were 100% required for every single team playing in eliminations. There was very, very few teams that had, no deep climb that were picked, and especially that were playing in elims. There are a few key exceptions, but it was a task that wasn't super, ended up not being super difficult to accomplish, and so a lot of teams kind of made the trade-offs that they needed to get that incorporated. At like the absolute highest level, though, the things that really kind of mattered were your speed on L1, and as well as your stackability, as well as your algae, I'm calling accuracy. And the reason for this was, every alliance basically was filling a reef at World's Elims, right? So kind of the speed with which you did that gave you obviously more time to focus on getting your L1 neatly placed, or getting your algae steals in. But those were kind of the hidden difference makers that weren't necessarily evident to everyone at the beginning of the year, where people weren't really focusing as much on having good L1 placements, and having you know accurate algae, where if there were eight algae in the net, you could put another one in without it bouncing over to the other side and giving them algae to score themselves. So those are the kinds of things that, the top tier teams obviously were forward thinking enough to kind of foresee that that would be something that they would need to incorporate in their design. But for a majority of teams, A, they didn't need to, and B, they didn't think about it. So let's see. So kind of going back to this breakdown, right? And I'll kind of just open it up real quick to anyone who wants to jump in the chat or jump off mute. Which of these do you think that the top teams really like honed in on to kind of get separation from those other teams? Which of these factors were in this game kind of the most important? Because identifying this kind of, sets up how you're going to strategize throughout the rest of the year. So what do y'all think?
I think that the ground pickup made a huge difference. Just watching a lot of the matches at Worlds, like having the ground pickup really set you on a different level. I mean, Worlds is a different level in general, but
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great call out. Almost all of like your Einstein level captains, especially the ones who kind of advanced in Einstein, were teams with some sort of oral ground pickup. Um, there were a few handful of teams without any kind of ground pickup this year who were really strong. Two of the strongest actually didn't go to Worlds, and Dave 3683 and Cybercast 4678. But for the most part, a majority of your your best absolute elite tier cyclers did have that. Yeah. What else I see in the chat? Andrew calls out reliability. Yeah. And I'll I'll say that that is, you know, pretty much the most important for every given game, is just having consistent functionality. Um, I think it's not necessarily something that's super game specific, but it's always going to be important. Yeah. Yeah, Eric says intaking speed and capability. Yes, absolutely. So this just kind of highlighted a couple that I wanted to shine out or shout out. Hello, James. Um, Intaking, as Eric just mentioned, uh, as we said, having that ground pickup really opened things up from a strategy standpoint, right? Because if you were getting defended with no ground pickup and you had three funnel teams, things got really cluttered, right? Because there's only two loading stations. So all they had to do was just sit at one and force three teams to go to the other. But having you know, a way to get Coral past a defender kind of opened things up strategically, and was also just faster, right? Because obviously you just had a shorter cycle. And then did also want to call out alignment. If you actually watch back videos and kind of break down how much time your each every team spent at each part of that cycle, and you saw where the biggest differences were between like the elite teams and your middle of the pack, you'd see that having a really snappy alignment, like right as you're driving towards the reef, you don't even, you know, have to take a step out of rhythm, right? You're just sliding right on in, scoring and backing out. Those top teams all kind of had that really quick alignment. And that was kind of where a big percentage differentiator was in those cycle times. So just want to give a quick overview of how our season went and kind of because as I said, this was our best season. Um, First of all, we had lots and lots and lots and lots of practice. I guess I can just kind of play this here, but we got a robot done pretty early this year. Like this is before our first event. This is March 5th. And obviously, that's like right before our first event, but we were pretty well oiled by that point. We had a very, heavy focus on automation where our driver would, you know, press a button and the robot would score, or the robot would drive to the loader station and get the exact proper distance away so that our human player can kind of just, toss it out and we can get going without even stopping. And that in combination with some very well-tuned vision um, meant that we could just pretty much stay on the move the entire match, right? Um, so that really kind of boosted our cycle times and let us cycle coral super quickly. You'll see as we work through some of these years that in the past we've struggled with reliability a pretty large amount. And so this year it was kind of an emphasis that we placed on staying reliable, so staying functional throughout the duration of a match, and that paid off in a pretty large way for us since we certainly weren't perfect, but just relative to other years, had a lot less technical issues. Some things we did is kind of as I said, we focused on the main cycle first, and then kind of left room to iterate on it later and then just slowly improved as the season went, right? So first event, we were designed to score algae, right? It was a bit of a coincidence that we were able to do the net. It wasn't like our original intended design to be able to score on the net. But we were able to make some small tweaks to a robot to let that happen. And we didn't even score algae at all in our first event, as I mentioned. Just wasn't something that was important whatsoever. And then after district champs, we put on our ground coral intake, which was super important for those kind of L1 stacks that I was talking about before, as well as we were able to add in like a pass through. So you can see like this is our intake back here. Um, you know, we were able to push a coral kind of through the flaps on the backside of that into our ramp and then just score on the rest of the levels. It was a little bit slower, certainly than like the top tier teams ground intakes, but also, for the front few faces of the reef, kind of that whole handoff system slowed us down more than just going to the station. But for those backside cycles, it was definitely faster. Another thing that we did that definitely gave us an advantage this year is we only used one driver, right? And there were some other top tier teams used one driver. There were a couple that used two for sure. But we found that it opened things up a huge amount for us. Opened things up for us strategy wise, since we were able to put a human player at both stations, meaning if there was defense on the way, we could just flip back and forth. But also when you have that many cycles happening, there's a lot of communication that kind of lends itself into that alignment factor that I was talking about before, where we were able to move a lot faster because we didn't have to, have that moment of communication of, okay, here's where we're scoring next, here's where we're scoring next. Instead, our driver was pretty, you know, self-operational in terms of where he wanted to score. So those are the things we did. Do not want to play that again. Did want to call out some simple designs which, found some different levels of success. So first of all, 94, 96, which is Link. Um, if, a lot of you probably familiar with them. Um, they are only in their second year, but are extremely, extremely successful. They haven't lost an event, other than losing at their division, of course, but uh, win all of their district events in their district championship. And they do it with super simple designs, right? And so this year, kind of at kickoff, I kind of thought about like, what is Link going to build this year? And they kind of built exactly what I thought, which was, you know, just a set angle, uh, coral ramp into an elevator. Um, and they just got really fast with it, right? And so they kind of, added net algae and a climb as the season went along, kind of similar to us. And they were able to just absolutely dominate their district again. Uh, Another robot I wanted to call out was Alpha, who is Appreciate, if you're familiar with them, 2468. It's not their second team, it's actually their third team. I think it's their freshman, right? They just built a straight up every bot, right? No swerve on tank, just straight up every bot. Had the deep climb, had the L1, that was it. And they were actually able to, you know, rank high and be captains at all three of their events, as well as a top 20% EPA. Absolutely insane for them, with literally just such a simple design to be able to do that. And if you go watch their matches, it is super super clean for an every bot. Some other robots I wanted to call out, and as we go through this, you'll see it. It's definitely a bit of a CHS focus here. Um, the West Coast Products competitive concept wasn't something terribly awful to pull off, but it obviously found a lot of success. There were some very strong teams in CHS using some kind of spin-off of it, and a lot of those RI3Ds also kind of had a good amount of value, and obviously those things were put out super quickly. So you don't always have to, you know, innovate too much on top of those to, be competitive as long as you're getting that practice in. All right, and then kind of at the full top end, right? You know, the best teams in the world, 2910, definitely up there. They literally just built essentially the exact same robot as what they built a couple years ago, back in 2023. So you can see here, like this is their robot this year. That's their 2023 robot. And kind of what made them so dangerous, especially in Einstein, was how smart they were driving, right? And I actually didn't include the video that I wanted to here, but we'll see in just a second, of like one example of what they were kind of looking for throughout the match, and kind of staying aware really helped them a ton. Madtown, obviously, pretty strong. Absolutely insane automation. Just wanted to kind of like show, like here, you see they're scoring, and then literally without a second passing as they're scoring, they have wrong button. They have another coral ready to go and scoring. So that was kind of a huge part of the game this year was automation. Um, and having those kind of pre-made processes in your robot that your driver just presses one button and your robot does the rest. They also kind of had that L1 intake, which was really fast, similar to ours. Obviously, their handoff was a little bit better than ours, and they were able to score on both sides with it, which meant way less turning, and turning is bad. Now, the one thing that I did want to call out with that is they didn't really lean into kind of what they were best at uh, in eliminations at Worlds. And part of that was because they couldn't pick up a robot who had a super strong L1 in alliance selection, just the way that it played out. But a lot of their kind of advantage was, kind of that double-sided scoring that they didn't have with that L1 ground intake. And if you actually go back and count cycles of how much they were doing in a normal match versus how much they were doing in elims at Worlds, it was definitely a bit of a drop-off because they were kind of forced to do what they weren't best at, right? And that's why, some of those scores and elims were so close when this alliance was pretty clearly the most powerful of any of the alliances there. Last call I wanted to have was Orbit, who probably the best coral scorer in the world, but they kind of had to sacrifice a little bit of their algae capability, right? They didn't have that ground algae pickup, and because they were using a vacuum to pick up algae, they did drop it sometimes. So real quick, I want to just pull up that match and just show kind of what the pivotal moment was and kind of how smart 2910 is. And yeah, we already kind of missed. So you can see right here, 1690 going for that algae. All right, that drops off. Okay, and then literally just a few seconds later, 2910, already seen it, already stealing it, and it's gone, right? And that, as well as a misclimb, ends up being the difference in the match. That's an 8-point swing. Misclimb is an extra 10 points. So that very easily could have made the difference there. All right. I think that's enough on 25. Y'all are probably pretty familiar with that. So going to move on to Crescendo now.
Welcome to the 2024 First Robotics Competition Game, Crescendo, presented by Haas. 2 alliances of 3 teams each compete to score or play notes in 3 different field elements, amplify their speaker, get on stage, harmonize, and take the spotlight before time runs out. Alliances earn additional rewards for meeting specific scoring thresholds and for cooperating with their opponents. Robots start each match inside their alliance's starting zone and may be preloaded with a note. During the first 15 seconds of the match, robots are autonomous and can be programmed to leave their starting zone, play preloaded notes in their speaker or amp, and collect and play additional notes. During the following 2 minutes and 15 seconds, drivers control their robots. Robots collect notes from human players at their source and play them in their amp and speaker. Each time an alliance plays 2 notes in their amp, the human player can hit a button to amplify their speaker for 10 seconds. Notes played in an amplified speaker are worth more points than those scored in an unamplified speaker. A human player may choose to play a note scored in their amp to cooperate with their opponent. If each alliance plays a note by hitting their cooperation button in the first 45 seconds of teleop, all teams in the match receive a cooperation point, which will influence a team's rank in the tournament. The number of played notes needed for a bonus ranking point is also reduced. Robots are protected from contact by their opponents when at their podium, off the ground, and during the last 20 seconds of the match while in contact with their stage. As time runs out, robots race to get on stage and deliver notes through the flap and into the trap. Bonus points are awarded for harmony when robots on stage use the same chain. On-stage robots earn even more points if a human player spotlights the robots on a chain by scoring a note on the chain's corresponding microphone. The alliance that earns the most points wins the match.
All right. You know what? I think everyone here knows it. Basically, you have, notes, which are the little rings, as well as chains in the middle of the field that you climb on. Notes could go kind of off to the side in what I'm going to call the secondary cycle for that, which is worth 1 point in teleop, but let you have those amplified cycles for the main cycle, which was your speaker, your high goal, which amplification boosted it from 2 points to 5 points. So this game kind of had two main strategies that you saw at the higher levels, but even a little bit early season as well, which was your full field cyclers and your passing and cleanup. So for full field, the main objective was on speed. It was helpful to have, shooting on the move, to have long range, and obviously a fast drivetrain with a low center of gravity that, you could get across the field quickly and, get around defense. But for passing and cleanup, it was, a pretty different skill set that you needed, because passers, there's a lot more focus on intaking because, intaking was a larger percent of the cycle that they were doing. And they also, needed to be able to just drop those notes in over the top to anywhere on the field. The thing with passing, though, was the top robots, the top passers, didn't really have as much separation in, how much time they were saving, what percentage of cycles more are they doing than the average team. Kind of just because of the nature of you didn't need to be as perfect with it, right? And yeah, I just said you needed cleanup bots, but basically those bots, instead of having a focus on like range or being able to shoot and accelerate away quickly, it was more having that kind of auto alignment down super fast. So, you pick up a note, goes in the amp, you pick up a note, goes in the amp, you pick up a note, goes in the speaker, and being able to align to those different scoring zones was kind of the main focus for them. This is a game where autonomous was extremely important because, every shot you made in auto was, worth a full amplified note in teleop. And especially early in the season when, teams didn't have that full amplification cycle down, uh, those autos mattered a ton. Right. And we'll see in just a second, like some teams that kind of took advantage of that. So kind of same question that we asked last time, right? For this game, where did the top teams kind of get their separation for? Again, you can drop it in the chat. You can come off mute. I don't care.
I personally think driving and speed was really important in 24.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, and I've highlighted a couple here. Driving was specifically for full field cyclers, super important. There was a lot of high speed collisions, and you needed to be able to dodge those. You need to be able to get back and forth across the field quickly. And any game where you have that kind of full field cycle, it's going to be super important. Called out scoring capability as well. Just being able to shoot from range was something that was very helpful. Being able to, score in the amp quickly as well. Some teams struggle with that. And then reliability, specifically accuracy. Um, so when you were amplified, especially, you weren't missing those shots, which could be, very costly in terms of, your points per cycle. So I'll talk about us very quickly here. Um, as I said, reliability issues were a pretty large issue for us. Um, we had some electrical issues. We chose to go with over the bumper intake, which gave us, a little more reach in autonomous for those auto races, but did, make us more susceptible to braking. We also didn't get very much full field drive practice. We, had some practice on our smaller field in our school, but we didn't have access to any kind of full field space, which definitely hurt us in terms of, how practice we were and like intaking all the way across the field, which is always very difficult. Also meant our autos weren't as reliable as we'd want them to be, because again, we didn't have a great space to kind of get all those tuned, but we still were able to kind of find some success, especially at champs where we were um, alliance captain, and we ended up finishing third in our division. We had tuned passing, which meant anywhere on the field, we can just anywhere where you can legally pass from on the field, we can just hit the pass button, and our robot will, adjust its heading as well as the launch angle, and try to get the note into the perfect spot for a cleanup bot to finish it up, which that was something that was, extremely useful, especially in elims. We also had note detection in our autos, which meant if a note had disappeared because another team had taken it, we could adjust and move to the next note and go steal that from them before they can get there, which meant we were basically going 1-for-1 with any team in auto, um, which was super important because of how many powerhouse teams there were on our division that year. So that was something that not a ton of teams had. The other thing we did was, we tried to play as smart as we possibly could, right? We were always looking for steals, similar to what we just saw with 2910. Anytime the other alliance was passing, we were going for that, as well as if, they were amplified and we were over on their half of the field, we'd go give them a bump or two to try to knock those amplified shots off. So kind of going back to the simple designs again. Another shout out to Link. Another, small robot from them, set angle shooter, and they also were able to amp, which not a lot of set angle shooters were able to. And again, they found a ton of success with something simple, just built a robot, you know, around speed. Tigerbots, one of our CHS teams, were uh, super good that year. They made Einstein as a second pick with Mechanical Advantage and Rembrandts. Another very small robot, very low profile, um, extremely quick. They didn't have a climb, which did hurt them a little bit for ranking points, but it didn't end up mattering that much. They're still able to win an event, finals at another, and then obviously make Einstein. With it's just something super simple from them. Give me one moment. Okay. Wanted to call out Triple Helix as well. Even though it wasn't their strongest year, and you're going to hear me call them out a few times. They were one of those specialists that I'd called out, if you weren't familiar with them. They were only able to score in the amp and the trap, but with, how the ranking points were set up that year, where, having the ability to do a trap almost guaranteed you an extra rank point. They got their robot done super early and practiced the hell out of it, and they were able to rank. This should be rank 1 at their second event, rank 2 at their first event, but they were able to win their second event with that, finals at their first event, alliance captains at district champs with a robot that couldn't play the main objective, right? Um, but even with that, they found a super simple design that they were able to finish off early and found a lot of success. Just reading through the chat real quick. Where do these ideas for micro optimizations come from? Driver, drive coach, feedback, planned from the start of the season, something else. Are you talking about like in terms of like opportunistic defense and whatnot? Because part of that, part of it is planned, right? Part of it is just from us analyzing the game at the beginning of the year, and then part of it for sure is feedback, driver feedback from like just play testing and that sort of thing. We try to get as good an idea as we can of how the game's going to play out before we, actually design anything. And um, as a part of that, of course, our driver is very skilled and plays a lot of XRC simulator, which isn't always the most realistic thing, but does kind of give you some ideas of, what some of the challenges in a real match might be. Yes, XRC mentioned. So, it's those kinds of things that are where we find some of those, hidden metas, some of those micro optimizations that we can kind of, take advantage of. Okay. So moving on to kind of the best robots from this year. So Orbit was a super low profile, light, insanely fast robot. And they were a good passer, but not that much better than other robots who were on our division. So this was a match that we had against them. I kind of just wanted to show we actually ended up winning this match, right? And this is a good alliance. 694 is a really good team from New York. 1986 team that gets a mention later in this presentation. Two strong teams, as well as Orbit, who, debatably the best team in the world. And you can see that they're going with a passing strategy here, right? And we are just happily stealing every single note that they toss over there, right? And we end up winning this match. So they pretty quickly pivoted away from that passing strategy. And in, Elims and on Einstein, they were one of the few teams who opted to go with, a full field cycling strategy as well as their partner 4522. And it was a lot harder to counter that because you didn't have those steals than your passing cleanup strategy was, right? So if we go here, and real quick, I'll also call out like 254 obviously was double-sided intake and a turret in the middle, which made them absolutely optimal to kind of clean up. You know, they kind of just had to shift side to side to grab notes that were being passed around, and a ton of automation for them just made everything super fast. So we can kind of just watch how things are playing out here. And kind of immediately as teleop starts, 1323 here is playing the passing role for red, and kind of because 321 is able to focus on playing man defense basically just on them, because they're the only one who theoretically, if your strategy is working to its fullest, should be going over there. Um, they're able to lock them up a lot better, right? Because they're not splitting their focus as much, whereas 294 over here playing defense as well. But they have two robots that they're trying to deal with. They're getting a little bit cross-eyed at times. So being able to identify that you know that there was more of a counterplay for the other strategy, I think really helped Orbit out a lot. They also kind of really just leaned into the fact that they were probably the fastest full field cycler in the world, right? You can see like these are two heavy robots on red, right? They're not necessarily built for sliding this quickly across the field like Orbit can. And so that's kind of what ended up making the difference in that. 2056 was one of the best teams in the world that year. A lot of people thought they were the best team in the world heading into Worlds, but in elims, they didn't lean into their advantages as I've been talking about. They ended up playing a passing role, and they got bounced pretty quickly on Einstein because, even though they were one of the fastest full field cyclers in the world, they didn't have as much of an advantage as a passer, right? Their design was good, obviously. They were a really smooth team, but because the strategy they chose and how they picked their line selection didn't lend itself to that, that's how it ended up playing out. Did want to call out another Chesapeake team as well. Kind of early season, absolutely dominant. Fresta Valley. And really for them, the whole story was just about autonomous, right? They had, I don't know why this is freezing, but they had probably definitely the best auto in the district. A six piece that was, functional pretty much immediately out of the gate week one. And it won them plenty of matches throughout the year, right? That they really lean into it, focused on only getting that auto tuned as best as it could. And I was trying to show this match, but basically their auto hits, they have like a 20-point lead out of auto. They only end up winning the match by like 15. Right. And so that was really the difference maker for them. I'm gonna see if I can't get this full screen out of here because this is like stuck. So 1 second. Lovely. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. I guess while we're at it, does anyone have any other questions or anything they want to shout out? Okay. There we go. Okay. Let's share again. Let's do sweet. All right. So we can move on now. if it would stop freaking out and start playing all the videos. All right, let's move on to Charged Up. And this game is old enough that I will just sit through and show the entire.
Welcome to the 2023 First Robotics Competition game, Charged Up, presented by Haas. 2 alliances of 3 teams each compete to score cubes and cones into their grid to charge up their community. The alliances earn additional points if their robots are docked to or engaged with their charge station. Robots start each match in their community and may be preloaded with either 1 cube or 1 cone. Each alliance may choose where to stage 4 additional game pieces. During the first 15 seconds of the match, robots are autonomous. Without guidance from their drivers, robots score preloaded game pieces, collect and score additional game pieces, and are docked to or engaged with their charge station. Charge station points earned during auto count towards a potential activation bonus. The grid has nodes specific to cones and cubes, and some where either a cone or cube can be scored. During the remaining 2 minutes and 15 seconds, drivers control their robots. Robots continue to collect cubes and cones from human players at their substations to deliver power to the grids in their community. Each community contains 3 grids. The center grid is the cooperation grid. A link is a line of 3 game pieces scored on the same row. Completing enough links earns the alliance a sustainability bonus. If each alliance scores at least 3 game pieces in the cooperation grid, the sustainability bonus threshold is lowered for both alliances. Robots are protected within their community and loading zones. As time runs out, robots race to their charge stations. Alliances earn points for each robot docked to or engaged with the charge station. Earning enough charge station points earns the alliance the activation bonus. The alliance that earns the most points wins the match.
Some of this, but basically cones, cubes go on the poles in the grid. So this game, in terms of like strategy that you'd see in a 2024 kind of game, was pretty simple, right? A lot of like the real strategy that your alliance should be focusing on was just coordination, right? This is something our alliance at Worlds, we made division finals, did really well. Was, we, really sat down and pathed out how the entire beginning of the match was going to play out, right? And this was another full field cycling game. So of course, speed was the most important thing, right? You had a lot of top teams using, 8 driving motors, so 12 motors total on their swerve, so that they could go fast. And a lot of it was because, like your teammates would get in your way. There were defenders that you'd, wanna bully. So you need to be able to get around them and then accelerate up to full speed immediately. And with this game, as I said, it was pretty simple because you weren't filling the entire grid until fairly late in the season. And then after that, point was hit, they just added supercharging, which just meant you could score 2 game pieces in one little slot. And so you could get away with, focusing only on even just the first row, which, you barely even needed anything other than a drive base to score on. You could just push bot cubes into those nodes. you could focus on the, yeah, exactly. Yes, Koibots had a cube shooter, which we will see a little bit more on in a moment, but it really wasn't strategically that involved and didn't require too much mechanical complexity to play at a decent level. Um, and kind of before I get into that, um, I will say though, as tried to reach up to that third level and started to make those micro optimizations that we've been talking about, um, there is, more and more complexity that got added in this game. What 422 ended up building was relatively simple and pretty much, the meta, which was just a tilted elevator with an intake that could, manipulate both game pieces and score both game pieces. Um, and there were a lot of teams that found, pretty good amounts of success just going with that design. So it kind of came down to getting it done early in dry practice, as I've said, with a lot of these. This game really wasn't too difficult to play at a strong level. It's just once you wanted to get up to that elite highest level, then it got pretty tough. So once again, and I've already kind of mentioned some of them, I'll open it back up. Which of these do you think mattered the most in terms of where the best teams were gaining their percent advantage versus the average teams? Yep, Jared, alignment for sure. And driving. Yeah, that's the two that I called out. Um, a lot of teams spent a long time in every match, turning left and right and left and right and left and right with the with a cone, just trying to drop it on a peg and wasting a lot of time that way. Um, if you had good vision, uh, that was something that was very beneficial. I know 422 did a lot of manual alignment that year. Just having a good driver helps a lot. Um, but that is where a lot of teams spent a majority of their cycles. Shori, I think that's a good call out as well. Intaking did matter. I think maybe a little bit less in separating, kind of the I'll say like the top versus the elite, right? Because there was a lot of top teams had at least really solid cube intakes. The cones were definitely what were a little bit trickier, but uh, some teams were fast at that, but still managed to have slow cycles overall, just because they were not scoring very quickly. So we can kind of just work through these quickly here. Um, and just going to show, Einstein finals where a lot of these fastest robots in the world were, particularly High Tide and Madtown. And kind of the things that I wanted to call out here is, you know, at least on both those first cycles, right? High Tide did not have to turn to score that cone, all right? Madtown did on that cone, but on the cube, they have a pass through in their robot that, intake on the back. Won't get to see them use it. Yeah, here you go. And then cube slides all the way through. And, even 254 said that that was something that they wish they had, especially for auto, because, getting those turns down perfectly wasn't easy. I know as the season went on, teams did find ways to kind of tune those autos to work, but it's just a lot simpler when you don't have to. Um, and yeah, you can just see like how insanely fast a high tide is, and like their literal driving speed is just much quicker than some of these other robots, even the ones on the field right now. Yeah, Amy, I think that's a great call out. And something you even just see in this match here, where having, you know, conflict management with pathing, as you know, the choreography that was talking about before, where you can kind of avoid some of these bumps with teammates, mattered a ton, right? So we actually, and I'll pull it up. We actually had a match with the exact alliance we had in Elims as our last qual match in Johnson. All right, just funny coincidence. This match we only put up 155, and a big reason for that is because we went into that match and we were like, we're fine. Let's just go play. And we got in each other's way. We slowed each other down a lot, and obviously the score was a good bit lower than what we were putting up consistently throughout elims. So having that coordination in a game where there's so much open space, but then it all funnels down into a tight space, can be an absolute game changer. And some other robots I wanted to call out. Midnight Inventors had a rebuild, or they literally renamed their robot Pivot, but their first robot was named Overreach. But they rebuilt to a simple cube shooter, right? So as you can see, so just intake / shooter on a drive base, and they were able to rank 1 and win at their second event, finalists at DCMP, and they were, I think, like a early second pick at Worlds, and played in elims. Right, so something as simple as this, great driving and speed, was able to, have all that success. Another team, Gacko, Hall of Fame team out of Chesapeake, literally just built an every bot on Swerve. They won an event, finalists at another, captains at DCMP. Right? Again, just having something that works consistently and that you can drive well with works. They, had some modifications on it. I think I don't think they were able to get like a multi-piece autonomous with it, at least at district champs. Because, every bot can't pick up off the ground, but it didn't matter for them at the early events because they were, such a solid cycler, just doing the main cycle. They were able to, cover whatever ground that they lost in auto. All right, and I'll pause. I did have a break section here, but any questions right now, or I'll just keep trucking on. The back half of this should be a little bit quicker, and I want to leave, at least a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of this as well. All right, I'll keep going. I can catch any questions afterwards.
Welcome to the 2022 First Robotics Competition. And this year's game, Rapid React, presented by the Boeing Company. 2 alliances of 3 teams each compete to score their cargo balls into the lower hub and the upper hub. They earn additional points if the robots traverse the rungs of their hangar. Robots start each match on one of their tarmacs and may be preloaded with 1 cargo each. During the first 15 seconds, robots are autonomous. Without guidance from drivers, they leave their tarmac, score preloaded cargo, and collect and score additional cargo. During the remaining 2 minutes and 15 seconds, drivers control their robots. They continue to gather up 2 cargo at a time and score cargo in the lower and upper hubs. Cargo scored into either hub count towards the cargo bonus. Launch pads protect robots from contact by opponent robots. Robots may use either terminal, where their human players assist the robots with acquiring cargo. As time runs out, robots race to their hangar and traverse as many rungs as possible. The higher a robot gets, the more points it earns. An alliance that reaches a hangar point threshold is rewarded with a ranking point. The alliance that earns the most points wins the match.
So again, pretty simple game. But yeah, for this one, okay, based on what you know, right, with the balls bouncing randomly and the one big goal in the center, what do we think were the important factors here? And for the sake of time, I'm just going to spoil it. There was a few, but the main things that I wanted to call out, intaking, just because of the way the balls would scatter around the field and they would, be bouncing. You really needed to be able to kind of deal with, you know, a ball game piece that could be moving in the opposite direction of your robot or in the same direction of your robot, right? As well as, yep, see the call out for swerve. This was, post COVID, the first game. Obviously, a lot of teams spent time developing their swerves, so you did see, kind of the first real bump in swerve counts that year. And kind of with the way the game was, circular and could use a lot of sideways movement, definitely lent itself to having that sideways moving ability. For scoring, yes, speed and range, being able to adjust, either if you have a hooded shooter, being able to adjust your shot angle definitely gave you more flexibility in terms of not having to drive some distance every single cycle. That sped you up a lot. And then also accuracy, um, specifically accuracy under defense was super important because there was a lot of defense played as I'll kind of get into here. So pretty chaotic game just in the way that every robot was trying to score in one singular location. And you needed to be able to, as I said, chase and pick up balls that were, moving in whatever random direction. And kind of because of everyone all trying to score in one spot, you had a lot of collisions again with teammates and defenders. So you kind of had to be smart about how you zoned out, where each robot on your alliance was going to play, right? And defense was pretty popular that year, so you needed to be able to have some way of scoring while you're facing defense, whether it's shooting from one of the protected zones or, having a turret that would, always be locked on to the center hub. And the other thing was traversal climbs were a massive point boost this year and almost gave you the entire RP. I think it was 15 points for a traversal climb and leave 2 points for every high goal shot made in teleop. So like 7.5 cycles just for climbing there is pretty huge. And you could hold 2 balls at once, so really, half that, but still super important, something a lot of the top teams had. Quick brief over our season. We didn't have swerve, didn't have that climb for our first event. Had a lot of our typical reliability issues. Um, though we were able to find some success, especially once we added that, traversal climb. And I wasn't super involved this season because, COVID kind of kept me out of the event venues, and I was actually still in college at this point. But we kind of made the realization this year that we were going to need Swerve the next year, but it wasn't something that we had already done our research and development on. So we really couldn't just, you know, pull it out of nowhere. And we missed Worlds this year. We had a fairly strong robot, but uh, overall, having some of those reliability issues fixed would have been something very nice. All right. And looking at the best of the best real quick. Basically, all the good robots were some version of turret on a swerve. Not necessarily all, but most of them. Um, like I don't think Citrus was, and they were pretty strong that year, 1678. But Cheesy Poo specifically had, two intakes, one on each side, so that as they were swerving around, they didn't have to keep turning. Um, they could just, shift one way or another, keep their turret facing the high goal, and they could shoot on the move and while being defended a little bit. So we'll watch a very quick just portion of like the teleop here. So this is a Chesapeake team here, 4099. It's Falcons. Poos are down here. They're going to be playing some defense, but um, as you can see, they kind of just swerve around. And this is the protected zone, so defense can't hit you there. But having, both those intakes definitely sped them up a lot. That's probably enough of that. Other thing I wanted to call out, and it wasn't necessarily the best robots, but reading the rules did you could find some kind of cheeky things that you could pull off and get an advantage in the end game. So I'll just show this is what one team 2481 did was they actually instead of going up one monkey bar to another, and the height limit was high enough that you weren't allowed to reach up directly to the top rung, they drove up the side and which the rules allowed for and hooked themselves directly onto the top, which that gave their partners plenty of space since you did want two robots at least up on that third rung, and B was a little bit faster. And then the other one, of course, that you have to call out is the Thunder Stamps, right? Jumping robot, sick. But it actually really wasn't that much faster because they had to charge their vacuum, which they used to jump, and then spend a long time lining up to actually make sure that they would hook on. So yeah, kind of to get to your questions, I'll do this again, Jared. Tank robots, right? Wasn't necessarily the easiest thing in the world to pull off, but 60328 did it this year. And really, you had to have pretty strong software, right? And so you can see here, this is actually one of the kind of hidden meta things that they're doing here, which is stealing the other alliance's balls in auto and hiding them, in the opposite side of the field. And you can kind of watch how they drive. It's just a lot of practice to kind of keep yourself aligned. You don't necessarily need to be moving sideways. It's just really helpful. There were some other viable tank robots, of course. Most of them had turrets, especially like the top tier ones. But mechanical advantage this year didn't have a turret, didn't have swerve, but I mean you can see just some super solid driving, a really good intake, and they did have a variable hood that let them shoot from range. That made it enough for them to be competitive and end up winning their division. And then the other team that you have to call out from Chesapeake, Triple Helix, one of the best Chesapeake seasons ever, with a fairly simple robot. Gosh, I keep doing this. With a really, really simple climb. Um, so as you can see, literally all it is just this little scoop into their shooter, and then their climb, literally just a couple wedges that they flick up and hook on to the second rung, right? So they flip those up and then it whacks up their hooks and then they climb. So not much mechanical complexity there for a good few points, and they absolutely dominated Chesapeake this year. Weren't able to go to Worlds because of COVID stuff, but um just super clean all around. All right, let's keep her moving here. Okay.
Welcome to the 2019 First Robotics Competition and this year's game, Destination Deep Space, presented by the Boeing Company. Two alliances of deep space travelers race to place hatch panels on their rockets and cargo ship, load valuable cargo for transport off the planet, and return to the safety of their habitat, all before the next sandstorm sweeps through. Each alliance has 2 rockets, 1 cargo ship, and a habitat. Hatch panels and cargo are available through the human player stations, and cargo is also available in the depots adjacent to the habitats. Robots start in their habitat and may be preloaded with 1 game piece. Alliances may also choose to preload some bays of their cargo ship with either hatch panels or cargo. During the first 15 seconds of each match, driver vision of the field will be blocked by a waning sandstorm. So robots must be controlled using either autonomous code or manually with a vision system on the robot. Alliances earn points for exiting the habitat, securing hatch panels, and any cargo that's properly stored. Cargo not secured spills from the cargo ship. As the sandstorm ends, driver vision returns, and alliances continue to earn points by loading their spacecraft. Alliances earn a rank point during qualifying matches for completing 1 rocket with hatch panels and cargo. Near the end of the match, robots return to the safety of their habitat for the upcoming launch and to earn more points. The alliance that earns the most points wins the match.
Let's go to the next slide. So I'll kind of just keep moving through here. So again, kind of similar to this year, another alignment game. You saw, and we'll see in a second, a lot of the top teams in the world champions at both championships, were swerve bots, which some teams kind of shied away from swerve just because of the drop off at the beginning of the match. Uh, they didn't want to. They wanted to have a drivetrain that would be a little more resilient, but the teams that did figure out how to use swerve benefited largely. And with intaking, you would pick up that the hatches from the I don't know, it's the loading station, right? And what a lot of the good teams figured out was you still wanted to just use wheels, right? Instead of two wheels, slipped right into the middle of the disc, was basically the intake that most of the best teams in the world used. A lot of teams did opt for, you know, pneumatic hooks that you just put through the disc and then flip them out, but those weren't always quite as snappy as the wheels were. And for scoring, being able to score on the opposite side of where you just intake from, especially for cargo, was something that you saw again a lot of the best teams, but not all of them do. And having you know a fairly fast elevator was something that could save you a lot of time, especially on scoring at the highest levels of the rocket. So, as I mentioned, both of the world champions were pretty similar robots, Madtown and Technodogs, and what they both had that kind of set them apart was what I mentioned was a pass through on their for their cargo scoring. So here's Madtown here, and I'll just skip into the match slightly. So they have that wheeled intake, and yeah, you can see here that they literally just glide over there and they're immediately going back to scoring again. So the ability to kind of do that meant they were a lot better under defense because again, anytime when you have to turn, defense is going to kill you, right? And so a great example of that is if you look at two of the best teams from Detroit who got together in elims, OP and Symbotics, they both had really similar designs to each other, which was just elevator, dual intake on a wrist, right? No pass through, no swerve. And ends up happening here is they get played defensed against by 1073, the Force team. And yeah, you can see they are struggling a good bit with it, right? That's slowing them down a lot more than other teams were. So and they get absolutely bullied there. You're only allowed to have one robot on the blue side of the field. They did get pushed over, but they do have to try what they can to get back. So not a lot of the good teams were on Swerve, especially this year. Even teams like 118 opted for H drive, and they met a similar fate in terms of defense because this was a year where you really should have identified pretty early that defense was going to be a large part of the game because of the tight spaces between each of these kind of choke points. You could do some real damage playing defense. So that was pretty much the meta at every level. And teams who could get around it well, whether it's through drive practice or through, whatever design advantages they have, those teams definitely benefited. One of those I didn't include a picture of, but 401 from that year was the CHS District Champion. If you remember what their 2023 robot looks like, if you're from the area, pretty much the I am not sure why that keeps happening. I've never had that issue before, but um, yeah, it was a simple version of a complex design, right? And they made the choice to kind of go with that, and it cost them early season because they bit off a lot. So their first event, they were just playing defense. Their second event, they were solid, but still not up to their potential. They didn't really get there until, well, quite frankly, until champs, right? But they built a design that could play the game at the highest level, which meant that they could pick up from both sides and score on both sides of the robot. So dealing with defense was a lot better for them. And then the simple designs from this year. So definitely need to call out, and it's not even just a CHS only thing, but 2998 is the Viking bots. They literally just built an every bot this year, right? And this is a very low resource team, right? Their driver was absolutely cracked, all right? And they made district championship finals as a first pick with just a simple every bot. Okay. And I think it kind of shows how much teams were over designing for, the level of success that they were ideally trying to achieve. If you recognize that, hey, my goal is to compete within the district, which is something that 422 did this year. Our main goal was to win DCMP. Then you realize that, hey, I didn't have to build that simple, or I didn't have to build that complex. I could build, very simple. Similar deal. 346, also Virginia team, was an Einstein captain, and they were low only, right? You can see their robot here. Just a little arm for cargo, a hatch mechanism, and again, just drove the hell out of it. And the difference maker that they had, that I'll show here real quick, was super, super, super fast end game. So this is on Einstein. Maybe this is the match. No, okay, they got it right. Yeah. So here, so you can see 13 seconds they're lined up, and boom, 10 seconds, and they're up on that high platform. Right, and that was a good number of points that scored you. So I think it was 12 out of the just over 100 that they were putting up. So kind of, you didn't have to have that good of rocket scoring if you focused on the simple objective, that the main cycles of that game. You could pick up teammates even on the world level who could cover your bases and still do really well. Similar deal for 2910 actually was also low only, and they were one of the best robots in the world still. They didn't get off their division because they were on the eventual world championship winning division, and they did not rank first, which if you want to pick Madtown, you're going to need to rank first. But they were still, extremely fast. And again, obviously this is kind of before Swerve was super popular, but they were lightning quick and could outcycle just about anyone, even though they couldn't do the rocket. Okie dokie. Let's keep moving quickly to power up. Don't need the audio.
Welcome to the 2018 FIRST Robotics Competition, and this year's game, FIRST Power Up. Two alliances of video game characters and their human operators are trapped in an arcade game. To escape, alliances use power cubes to control switches and the scale, pass power cubes through the exchange for power-ups, and ascend to face the boss. Teams may preload up to one power cube per robot. Additional power cubes are available in the power cube piles, along the fence nearest the scale, and in each alliance portal. At the start of the match, the plates of the scale and the switches are randomized. During the first 15 seconds, robots are autonomous. They work to cross their auto line and place power cubes on the switch and the scale. Alliances who successfully own their switch and have 3 robots cross the auto line will receive 1 ranking point. During the following 2-minute and 15-second teleoperated period, human operators remotely control their robots. They continue to gather power cubes to place on the scale and the switches to gain ownership for the longest time, earning points for each second of ownership. Human operators behind the Alliance Station wall collect power cubes from the exchange. They can deliver them back to the robots through the return or to their vault. In the vault, power cubes may be traded in for 3 power-ups. Alliances choose when in the match to activate each power-up to gain a temporary advantage during the match. The Force power-up gives an alliance ownership of their switch, the scale, or both. The Boost power-up increases scoring for 10 seconds for either their switch, the scale, or both. And near the end of the match, Levitate earns one member of the Alliance a free climb. Other Alliance members climb from their platform. If all 3 members successfully climb, the Alliance can face the boss and gain an additional ranking point. The Alliance that earns the most points wins the match and defeats the boss.
Game, right? And kind of the name of this game was really in autonomous, and we'll take a look at 254 in a second, but they were able to dominate every match just with a good auto because of the way the game was, because when you had control of the scale, it was literally harder to score on for the other alliance, right? There's a bit of a snowball effect where if you took the lead immediately and you had a pretty big lead, it got pretty hard to lose because the scale would lift up on the other side, right? So you literally were having to extend higher up to score on it, which meant that it would take longer, obviously, and some teams just actually couldn't score when the scale was in, the opposite position, especially if there already was a layer of cubes already on it. And as part of that, you need to be able to have a fast elevator. And a lot of the good teams had the ability to score on the opposite side that they're picking up, whether they're going over the back or going through their elevator. That way you wouldn't have to keep turning in autonomous, right? And obviously you'd also need a pretty fast intake to score as many pieces in auto as possible. So I'll show off their auto here, 254's auto, right? There were, I think, 3 4-piece autos to my knowledge in the world, right? There was 254, there was 2471, who's the main machine, who's a PNW team, and there was 842 Falcon from Arizona. And you can see there that this is just how smooth it was, right? So they have their elevator, moves up, their arm just kind of flips through their elevator, cube shoots through it, just keep picking up, and they don't stop. And there was randomness in like which side was assigned to which color, which, meant you had to have A, teams on both sides who had good autos, and B, you had to have like complementary autos. So I think like what some teams did was they'd have the outside team here kind of score on this like side. They'd come all the way around the side and lift up and score, while this team would like drive all the way over, score 1, pick another, score it, try to go for 3. So there was some luck there, but most of the time, especially early season, you would just have one team kind of going for your auto, whoever side it lands on, right? And so another team I'm going to call out is 2910. this was kind of their first year in the spotlight, their breakout year. And they did it with a really simple design, right? And I'll show you the picture in a second. You can see here that because the scale was already like tilted the other way, made that shot a little harder for them, and they had to drive all the way from over on this side. Okay, and so yeah, here's their robot. You can see literally just like elevator with a little bumper cutout. Cube just slides in, and they just drove really, really well and had pretty solid controls, like in terms of auto. But you could see there, like their auto was not that crazy. So in a game where autos really mattered a ton, um, they were able to, you know, just drive well enough and be fast enough in teleop that they could overcome whatever deficit that they were facing, right? And they were able to make it all the way to Einstein finals before they eventually lost to the undefeated world champs. So there was also kind of like a hidden meta again of the highest level, which was, if you sat down, you could kind of figure out that it would be a thing. But there's a typo here, but once the first layer of cubes was kind of, finished on the scale, once you had like 6-ish cubes up there, it got progressively harder and harder to score more. And obviously at the highest levels, um, you were going to need more than just 6 to keep control throughout an entire match. So some teams designed intakes that made it really easy for them to stack, right? It gave them long reach so they could elevate up and then kind of reach over their like stack of cubes, so that way they weren't like, pushing anything as they were, trying to get everything aligned. Other teams opted to, score cubes. They weren't perfectly cubic, or actually just, rectangular prisms, so they did have like a short side, so you could pack them in the short way to kind of ensure that you were getting as many as possible in there. And then you had also other teams who just kind of just scattered things along and weren't as neat with all their scoring, and that didn't work at the highest level. So you saw teams like 195 who could stack really well, really excelling, and they made Einstein that year. Did also just want to give a shout out to Gacko from CHS, who was pretty much just a meta design, something you also saw out of like 2056. Of course, they had a buddy climb, which was something you saw some of the best teams had, ramps that they would flip down so that they could, carry teammates up and guarantee that they would get the ranking point that you'd need from having everyone on your alliance having points for climbing. Now again, you could get the free climb, so it didn't matter too much. But what they did was just had again, well executed robot without a crazy design. We were able to rank first at TCMP, and even though they lost, they were still very strong, and that was not really as much of their fault. That, the lower alliances were probably a little stronger than they should have been, just because of some bad luck in alliance selection for them. But there's also some other designs I want to call out real quickly, and I'm going to move real fast through the rest of this. But yeah, some real short designs here. 2655 literally could not play the scale, but still ended up winning their division because they were just so fast at, playing the switches and the vault, which still mattered a lot. And you could actually, part of the strategy was that you could almost distract the good teams from playing on the scale if you timed your far side switch attack properly, because there was kind of like three areas that you had to manage. If you caught them kind of lacking on, managing their switch, you could cause some panic on their lines. There's also cube shooters, which again, like I said, kind of faded a little bit towards the end of the year because they couldn't stack as well, but super good early year. 346 especially because they also could use their shooter basically just as a slide to slide cubes up on the switch. All right, as I said, I'm just gonna breeze through.
Welcome to the first robotics competition and the 2017 game, First Steamworks! 2 adventurer clubs, alliances of 3 teams each, prepare for a long-distance airship race by collecting fuel to build steam pressure, installing gears to engage rotors, and climbing aboard for liftoff. The airship best prepared for flight when the launch timer reaches 0 wins. Matches begin with robots touching their Alliance station wall. Teams may preload up to 10 fuel elements and 1 gear on each robot. Fuel is available in hoppers placed around the perimeter of the field. Additional fuel and gears are available at the Alliance loading station. During the first 15 seconds of the match, the robots are autonomous. They work to reach their baseline, score fuel in the boiler, or deliver gears to the airship. During the following 2-minute and 15-second teleoperated period, human drivers remotely control their robots. They continue to gather fuel from the field and the hoppers to score in the boilers. They also collect and deliver more gears. Human players located behind the Alliance station wall deliver gears and recycled fuel to robots through the loading stations. Steam pressure builds as fuel is added to the boilers. The high boiler produces more steam per unit of fuel than the low boiler. The more fuel scored in the boiler, the higher the steam pressure climbs. Alliances earn points for the amount of steam pressure built, and pressure over a certain level earns an additional bonus. Each airship has 4 rotors, with some gears missing. Oh dear. Gears delivered to the airship lifts are retrieved by the airship pilots, who then place them in the gear train to engage and spin up the rotors. Each rotor requires an increasing number of gears to become engaged. Points are awarded for each airship rotor turning by the end of the match. Airships spinning all 4 rotors also earn an additional bonus. Towards the end of each match, pilots deploy ropes for their robots to climb aboard. Alliances earn points for each robot secured aboard the airship by the end of the match. Be prepared. It takes time for the boilers to process fuel for the airships. Fuel put in the boiler near the very end of the match may not get processed before the airship takes off. The alliance with the highest score at the end of the match earns the win. Ready your robot, fly your banner, and prepare to take flight with this year's first robotics competition, First Steamworks! Ha ha!
Also, climbing that year, super important. There were ropes at the end of the game you would climb. It was pretty easy to pull off. Literally, you just have some Velcro, hook and loop, whatever you wanted to call it, and just kind of use a roller covered in that to catch your rope and then just spin your way up. But absolutely this year, straight line speed, totally important. And intaking. So the best teams, and we'll see pictures of a couple in a second. Actually, yeah, I think there's a couple, but the best teams all had ground intakes for the gears. It helped if you dropped a gear when you're trying to score it, instead of that being a completely lost cycle, it just cost you like a few seconds. Which that was huge, as well as you didn't need to have perfect alignment all the way on the far side of the field. Again, that's something you're typically going to want to avoid, just because especially if you're in a bad driver station. Visibility is almost never easy, and this year was a very big offender of that because of the massive ships in the middle of the field. So having that ground intake was a total game changer. And at the very top level, which was the only time fuel mattered, fuel absolutely did not matter the earliest weeks because teams weren't maxing out their gear points. You needed to have a high fire rate, right? And that mattered more than just accuracy, right? You saw a lot of good teams just kind of lobbing fuel up in the air, and that was how they were scoring. So Poofs here had this double barrel fuel shooter as well as ground intake. Titanium was interesting because they were an asymmetrical robot, so their auto was actually just much better on red than it was on blue. And you can see this is Titanium over here. You can see how accurate they are. Poofs actually missed a lot of their hopper, which are these big bins of balls. And so they ended up dropping a lot. And you can see auto mattered a ton more because the balls were worth triple. So this was a pretty big comeback here that Blue had to pull off. And 254's fire rate was definitely very helpful. 2767 also this year. Again, this is before swerve was really popular. Having that swerve helped a lot because you needed to kind of get aligned with the pegs, which wasn't quite as easy as it seemed. You can see like Poofs here, and they just drop that gear, but because they have that ground pickup, they can just flick it right back up. And having all of that helped those gear cycles a ton. And going next. So one of the world champions from Houston is this little guy here. It's Crush. Literally just a ground gear intake, nothing else. They did climb, of course. Every team, like past, the first couple of weeks, really needed to climb. And they were a first pick, or maybe captain, I can't quite remember, on their alliance, and ended up winning worlds, doing nothing but just driving fast. Right. And in Chesapeake, all three of these teams were basically just the same thing, just ground intakes that were really fast. One of the kind of hidden strats this year was having fuel to break ties, because the way the scoring worked, you didn't score per gear, right? There were different thresholds that you got points once you hit one gear, once you hit 3 gears, once you hit 6 gears, once you hit 12 gears, right? And so a lot of times there were ties because teams were just like getting caught in the same thresholds. So both these teams had, some way of just scoring the fuel that they were allowed to preload just to get 1 point, right? That's all they cared about, just to break those ties. And that worked well for them. That helped them steal matches. These two teams actually ended up winning district champs together. So there was a few teams that did that kind of worldwide, but overall, the most important thing by far this year was just gear speed, right? And because because fuel was worth just so much less, it absolutely did not matter one bit, especially in Chesapeake, until the world stage, quite frankly. And I will just I didn't even put in the right one for that. Okay. So we'll just kind of fly through Stronghold real quickly. I'll just kind of give a quick introduction of what I wanted to say here. So this game, you had these obstacles that your other alliance could pick which ones they wanted you to have to deal with, and there were balls that you could score in the castle. And so what some of the best teams in the world realized is that this obstacle right here was always there. Yeah, you weren't allowed to change that one. That one is called the low bar. And they found that there was a cycle where if you literally just drive under the low bar and drive past, you could get away with not turning at all. right? And so 254 had a turret where they literally, and you'll see it later in the match. So right now, you get points for crossing the defenses. So that's why they're doing that. But right here, you can see they literally just drive in a straight line, turret up, shot up, go back, right? And a lot of the best teams in the world kind of took advantage of that, where literally they would just do this over and over for, the rest of the match. Another thing that, you know, Orbit and some of the other best teams in the world did, it was a little bit difficult to get balls because the way like the loading station worked, it was difficult to get them all the way out here. Some of the best teams in the world like practiced a ton, and they were able to get balls all the way over to the other low bar for their team to just easily scoop up and pick up. And 1086, I didn't end up writing everything here. This is year my brother was there. They won the world championship. They did have consistency issues throughout the year, but they were able to win their first two events. They picked up 6 blue banners that year. And they did it with pretty much just intake, a catapult, and a drivetrain. And having smart driving really made a difference for them because they were able to, again, kind of play like opportunistic defense where, especially like early in the match when you have like a bunch of balls in the middle still and teams are kind of racing for them, you could like trap good teams in this area and, kind of take those trade-offs where, I don't care if you slow me down because, you'd normally be doing so many more cycles. I don't care if we go 1 for 1. So those were the kinds of things that they did that helped make them so successful. Okay, and then I also just had a quick thing on chokehold strategies. I'll send these out. You've probably seen these before, especially if you've looked at like Karthik's effective strategies presentation. But basically, just wanted to include this that every year at the beginning, you should be evaluating for if there's a strategy that can guarantee a win if you pull it off. And even if you can't find that, kind of along the way, you might find other successful strategies that might not guarantee you a win, but would, help greatly. All right, we can continue. Okay, so it is 7:30. I do think this will be the longest of the sessions, so thank you to everyone who has stuck around so long. Do want to just open it up to everyone here for questions for any other comments, whether it's on this presentation, any of the other presentations, anything at all. And yes, Eric, that's a great shout. Yeah, there was one obstacle that you could put down kind of next to the low bar, which would let you, well, the obstacle was like it was 2 ramps kind of and like facing opposite directions. A little bit hard to explain, but you could roll the ball up the ramp and onto your side of the field, so you didn't have to cross any of the obstacles to score it, which again, extremely difficult to practice, especially without like a full field. But if you do have access to that kind of space, having human player practice, absolutely worth it. Especially in a year like this year, we used a ton of human player practice just to get the timing down of, when our robot was coming in, what distance should we wait for before we start pushing. So by the time the coral is landing, the robot is in the perfect position to receive it, as well as for like ground intakes. What's the way that we can consistently get the coral out into the correct position. So that's another thing that it's good to think about instead of just worrying about your robot. Having a good human player can add a lot of value to your alliance. Any other questions? Yeah. So Jonathan, yeah, what do the top teams do in order to set themselves apart from most other teams? So I think one of the main things now, and if you listen to Karthik's effective strategy presentations, he talks about this as well, right? Is over the years, FRC has really kind of changed from, especially at the top level, from a mechanical challenge to a software challenge, right? The best teams in the world are the teams with the best software, the best automation, especially. Um, Mechanically, it really most games don't require that much complexity. Most of the advantage that you're going to find is in, their ability to complete tasks while doing other tasks, complete tasks without stopping moving. Um, and having that really strong software nowadays is typically what sets teams apart, especially with how much you know off the shelf, how many off the shelf products you can get. You can buy a entire elevator, you can buy your swerves nowadays. So yeah, I think software is kind of the easy answer there.
Yeah, if I could butt in
Go for it.
briefly. When I went around and interviewed like the top teams at Worlds, 4414 and 1690 were both from the field I was looking at. It's not only they have great robots, but they have amazing systems. Like the amount of training the kids do, the amount of prep work they do, the timetable to which they hold themselves, and the degree to make sure that everyone's on the same page before we move forward. Effectively, it all guarantees that they'll have a good robot. Like, sure, you have some robots that are world class and some that are just great, but their systems that they have in place that they build out from day one just really set them apart as soon as you talk to them at all.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. All right. Any other questions about anything else? Give it a minute in case anyone's typing. Okay, yes. Common theme I've seen in some of these, the impact drive practice can have. How do good teams go about drive practice? That is a great question. So this year was definitely the most drive practice that we got by far. And the main way we handled it was literally just having our driver go through 2 minute and 15-second reps over and over, right? That was the main thing that we did, right? Obviously, it's best if you can have access to some kind of full field, but whatever you have at home can work, as long as, you're able to simulate at least part of the game that you can play for 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And what that does is it gets the timing in his head of, how much time is left in a match. When do I need to start thinking about end game? When do I, if depending on the game, when do I need to start thinking about like playing defense? Obviously, your drive coach should be there to, keep you informed of time along the way, but it's also good for them to kind of have that, your driver to have that internal clock built in. We did do like occasional kind of situational work as well of like, okay, let's practice 20 seconds left. We need two more coral to hit the RP. Um, let's see if we can do that and then climb, right? So kind of practicing those stressful situations can be useful. Don't want to do it too much because you do need to have kind of you don't want to have them build like strict habits of like perfect conditions kind of that you're going to have in practice, but it still can be good to, exercise their even their like mental fortitude and discipline of, understanding exactly when they need to quit trying to get those extra cycles in and go do something else. Um, and for us, I will say, we have an experienced or had this season an experienced driver. So we didn't really need to go through like basic driving drills. That can be a good place to start, just like getting the controls down, running through like figure eights, that kind of thing. But I think it's pretty useful to pretty quickly just transition to getting full match reps, occasionally getting other teams involved, and just making it as competition like as possible. It's a great question. How should a team practice? They just don't have any way to have their own practice field stuff. So I think you just need to find someone in the area, ideally, who has something. And if you really can't, um, I'll just say XRC can be okay. The online simulator. Our driver played, you know, hours on hours on hours on hours of that, and it doesn't all completely convert, but if you don't have anything else, I would say it's a close enough simulation of at least understanding how the game should flow. You might not have as good control over your particular robot, but you would build that game sense and understand how in certain situations what you should be doing. Like if you're getting defended, where should I be driving? What moves should I be working on? But I think ideally, you just need to reach out to someone in the area who does have a field. That's what we did. We didn't have a field of our own this year. Um, 1086 and Tenreiko, they were nice enough to let us practice on their field for most of the year. So yeah, what Emily said I think is a great point. Um, it's almost always better to get real practice in, like real competition like practice in by having other teams on the field, because you're not almost never going to be in a 1v3 just all alone by yourself.